Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest OhioX virtual event, The Art of the Pitch, where we have two seasoned PR, content marketing specialists and experts today with us, where we're going to talk about technology, newsmaking, storytelling, content creation, marketing, but really how do companies, how do ideas in the tech sector get their message, get their work, get their story shared. My name is Chris Berry. I'm the president and CEO of OhioX. We're a statewide nonprofit technology trade association where our work brings together companies from startups to Fortune 500s and everything in between to connect, promote, and advocate for the growth of Ohio's tech sector. And as part of that, we like to think that awareness is really at the heart of it all. And if we don't start with awareness, if people don't know that people or companies or ideas exist, you can't connect, you can't promote, and you can't advocate for it all. And so, as we have this conversation today, I'm really looking forward to our two guests joining us, getting to share a little bit of their insights, share some of their expertise, because they have been working in the content marketing PR space for quite some time. It's a competitive media and content landscape. And so getting your tech story noticed requires more than just a compelling narrative or something that you think should be covered. You've probably been on LinkedIn or maybe read a business paper or publication and thought, well, why does that company get all the coverage? Why did that company have all these likes on LinkedIn, but mine doesn't? And so during our session today, over the next hour or so, we will have these seasoned professionals that are going to share some key insights and actionable strategies to help get your tech noticed by media and customers. We're going to talk a little bit about the secrets behind successful media pitches, so working with traditional media publications, creating your own content, so sharing it on places like blogs and websites, certainly social media, and how that can stand out. And then some of the work that OhioX is doing and building to hopefully help solve for some of these, challenges or frustrations of people wishing that more tech stories were able to be told and we could promote more that was going on. And so as we're having this conversation, a couple points, we want this to be interactive. So whether it's in the group chat or if you want to shoot it to me as a DM on here, we very much recommend that you go into the chat and you drop, who you are, what part of the state you're from, and join the conversation. And again, we'll try to sprinkle in some of the questions that we get throughout, but at the end, we'll also do a dedicated Q&A. So first up, I want to welcome our two guest speakers and invite them to share a little bit about themselves. First up, we're going to go with Evan Weiss, who is a former journalist, and he's also the founder of Ease Creative. Evan and I have known each other for quite some time. When he was first doing journalism at Columbus Business First in Columbus. Then he built his own company, has been really helpful and instrumental in OhioX and our work, getting to tell our story. So Evan, welcome to the conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for having me. Thanks for having me and for the brief introduction there. But like Chris said, I am a former journalist with Columbus Business First. That's where I started my career and spent 5 years there reporting on a variety of business topics, focused there in Columbus with a particular focus on real estate and finance, but also some entrepreneurship and tech and nonprofits. So it really covered the gamut. After I spent my time at Business First, I did some freelance work and then actually went into the sort of marketing agency world where I was doing some PR consulting and helping companies tell their stories and using that journalism background to really assist them with getting publicity in the local media and national media as well. And then, as Chris mentioned, I've been helping out OhioX since the launch with branded content or real journalism, authentic news articles, and just getting to help people get their message out there with Q&As and all sorts of story types and article types that to help tell the Ohio tech story. So it's been really fun to work with Chris over the past couple of years on this. I don't know how long has it been, Chris? When was the launch of OhioX? But
well,
technically
5 years in December, but that was also, if you'll remember, just a couple months before COVID hit. And so starting something like this with a bunch of volunteers at the time,
Yeah.
as COVID's happening, not the best time in the world. So we kind of paused. So it's technically 5, but probably closer to, 4-ish or so.
So, and then also more recently with the launch of ohiotechnews.com and really focusing on that um, storytelling aspect of promoting tech across Ohio. So, been awesome to help with that, and appreciate Chris inviting me to this webinar and share whatever insights I'm able to with the audience today. So, look forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Evan, and thanks for joining us today and getting to share some of your expertise. Really appreciate it. And our second guest is Steve Cross, who is the founder and CEO of Ice Energy. Steve is another friend, but someone we've met a little more recently, past year or so. But Steve has a great company, a great agency that just so happens to be built in Northeastern Ohio, but does work with clients across the globe. And so Steve and his team have also been helping out OhioX and ohiotechnews.com with some content work, telling some stories. And this is what they do each and every day, the team that Steve has built. So Steve, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. Just appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you having me on. I'm honored to be sharing the screen with both you and Evan. Hopefully I can deliver something of some value with you guys to the attendees. But a little bit of background on me. I didn't come through the marketing world, kind of like Evan's story. I started out in basically the STEM world. I went to Baldwin Wallace College, born and raised in Ohio, Baldwin Wallace up in Cleveland. Went through the engineering route, more of a data and analytics guy that then learned and kind of went over into the marketing side when I founded Ice Energy. But about 15 years now. So I was a follower of Ohio X in the very beginning, and it just naturally gravitated toward the content, what you're trying to do, Chris. So it's and I want to tell everybody, I probably hit Chris up 50 times saying, how can we help? What can I do to help? And I think he thought I was giving him a really soft pitch the whole time, when all I wanted to really do is just help, because I love the mission, the cause, and just wanted to be involved in some way to help promote it and to prop it up. So here we are, and any way I can help out, I'm always happy to.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. And yeah, you and your team have been fantastic as we've been getting some of our content up and running. And it's been a fun process where we're still actively building this. And I still feel like we're kind of in the early innings and trying to piece different things together and grow within a kind of the mold of a small nonprofit startup, which is maybe a bit of an oxymoron to most of the tech folks that we get to work with. But in this conversation already, we've mentioned this new site that we have, ohiotechnews.com. And I want to start a bit sharing there, because one of the biggest pieces of kind of opportunity we saw, where people are saying, hey, there's all this great work happening across the state, people, companies, ideas, but it's tough to get traditional media coverage. It's a really crowded kind of space online and content marketing. But we need to do a better job of telling these stories, because you don't have to go to San Francisco or Seattle or New York or Boston to find serious technology. It is happening here. And so when we got up and running, as Evan mentioned, about 4 or 5 years ago at this point, one of the early things we started doing, just because we're all in different cities, it's a big state, we have a lot of metro areas really spread out, was we started sending a weekly newsletter where we would just capture different news, different items that were happening in tech across the state, and we started sending it out. People really enjoyed it, because historically, if you were up in Cleveland, or if you're up in Youngstown or Cincinnati or Toledo or somewhere else, you would kind of read what was in your bubble, because you didn't necessarily have a business subscription to all the different publications across the state. And Steve, you being in Northeastern Ohio, to follow what's going on in the 7 or 8 different media markets across the state is a big task. And so we started doing that. But what happened was that as our readership grew, as more and more people started following along and subscribing, what we heard was, hey, this is great, but we really can't hear, or we can't read it, I should say, all the different stories that are happening, because today's media environment, there's a lot of paywalls, there's a lot of subscription based. And so we said, hey, well, how do we start maybe telling these stories more directly and not just sharing what others are creating? And so I'm going to share now one of our newest initiatives, which both Steve and Evan have been really helpful with, and really instrumental in helping us build out. But it's ohiotechnews.com. Steve, with the work you did, we went true SEO, where instead of kind of finding a creative news and name, we just went ohiotechnews.com so people knew exactly what we were doing. But this is our new site, OhioX's product, working with people like Steve and Evan and others that are helping build and tell more stories directly. So we're able to cover things happening like this first one up by Keith Instone in Toledo that just happened the other night, or this news with St. Elizabeth and Cincy Tech down in Cincinnati. A perfect example of two different pockets and regions of the state where we've been able to tell some of these stories. This Ohio Life Sciences is a Columbus based, as my mouse is going a little wild on me here. But Ohio Life Sciences, they're working with Columbus State Community College around the biotech and building out that workforce. And then this was a fun one that we put together, as simple as it is. As we travel the state, we don't have an office. Most of my meetings happen in coffee shops or going to offices like Steve across Ohio. And so as people kept asking, hey, what are, maybe some of your favorite spots? And we like to ask that question in a fun way too. We just put together a list of local small businesses where you're going to find a lot of tech people working based on their recommendations. And so what we did is we built this site so we can do some of this original storytelling and original reporting. By all means, have we solved this and have we told every story that's worth telling? Absolutely not. We are still very much a small team that doesn't have all the resources in the world, but with the help of folks like Steve and Evan and others, slowly but surely, each week, each month, we're going to tell more and more stories directly, and hopefully make it easier to connect, promote, and advocate. And so that's a bit of what we're doing to help tell this. But how do companies get their messages on here or other traditional publications, or get noticed on social media and whatnot? And so that's what our conversation is going to go to now. So I'm going to kind of invite back Evan and Steve to the conversation. Maybe Steve, for you, your company works with companies across the globe. You're telling stories about companies and organizations and ideas, big and small, from startups to really big companies. But what are some of the keys to success as you think about what quality content creation looks like? You all are really big on SEO. So how do you go from, hey, I have this idea, I'm doing this work, to creating a really compelling piece of content?
Yeah, I think it starts with the goal, right? Are you looking to be found organically? Are you trying to talk to a certain audience, and kind of defining that scope of what you want to achieve out of the story and out of the reach? And where are you trying to get that? Sometimes it's the larger reach, it's crossing verticals, it's crossing geographies. Other times it's speaking very directly to, your niche. But in my, Evan will probably be able to speak on this better, but in my experience, it's crafting the story, right? It's, what does this mean? What's it mean to me? The background, what the emotional side of it that they went through, the startup went through, or they're going through, the business obstacles, what they're achieving, and then not just talking about the features of the tech or the deal, what they went through and where they're going, but it's the benefits now. What are we trying to reach for a certain community or for the area or for a sector? And I think that, to me, is the biggest thing, is crafting how that story's developed. And it probably sounds like an oxymoron coming from an SEO guy, but we always start there with the creative side of it, and then we optimize from SEO. If you start with SEO, I think you're going to be always limited in reach. But in anything in today's world, like even with anything you do for your business or for marketing or advertising, start with a creative, start with a pitch, start with the strategy, and then work backwards into it. Rather than, and I think SEO should probably be the stamp at the end, rather than the lead, in my opinion.
That's great. Well, thank you, Stephen. And Evan, would love your perspective as a former journalist that then, built your own agency as well. But, especially as a journalist, you get probably, I can only imagine, dozens upon dozens of pitches of company press releases, of ideas for stories, but you certainly can't write all them just based on time. And frankly, a lot of stories aren't worth, kind of the ink in the paper, if you will. So how, as you were getting these dozens of pitches each week across, let's keep it maybe technology focused for this, since I know you were doing finance and real estate. But how would you kind of go through those, see what those maybe were, which ones were worth, your time to put something together? Because I think that's also something, whether it's our website or others, it's a lot of time to take an idea, Steve, to your point, come up with how you're going to tell it, put it on paper. And so it's not just, a lot of folks are now doing AI and you just kind of toss it in, but you can kind of tell it's not really good. So Evan, how would you sift through a bunch of ideas and pick the ones that were maybe most worth telling?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And journalists do get so many pitches. I can't even imagine for a national reporter at the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, wherever, just the volume that comes in. It's just the the sheer volume is tough to manage. But at Columbus Business First, I can speak to my experience there, getting several pitches a day about companies that were expanding or raising money or launching a new product, a joint venture, some sort of partnership. So all of this stuff can be newsworthy, but what separates the best ones is the context and the uniqueness of it. And so what I mean by context is that know your audience. If you're pitching to Columbus Business First, it should be a story that's really relevant to the Columbus community. Here we're talking about Ohio as a whole, right? With Ohio Tech News and Ohio X, and we look at this lens statewide. But if you're in Cleveland and it's Crane's Cleveland, then it should be something that's impactful and meaningful to the readers of their publication. So you should be familiar with a particular publication that you're pitching to and who their audience is and what sort of stories they like to tell. Same goes for Cincinnati and Dayton and around the state. And then that second piece, the uniqueness, you can find a unique angle to whatever story you're telling, even if it's every company is. I did a lot of tech fundraising announcements for Series A, Series B, and the dollar amount tends to be the headline. But there's a lot of really interesting stories beyond that. And so you can get the attention of a journalist by really knowing what the compelling story is there. So maybe just as an example, if you're in Columbus and the founder, it's two founders who were roommates at Ohio State. I think that's right from the start. That would be something that I would gravitate to because it has such a deep local tie, and it's a story that brings in other institutions within Columbus. And so you're not just talking about this company that's out on an island that is nobody's heard of, and the founders have no connection to Columbus, right? So the local angle and the context matter, but then also that uniqueness of, maybe the founders have a unique story, or the product is particularly unique, or even the way they raise money. Now there are ways to get attention just by the sheer size of the fundraising announcement. If you're raising $100 million, it's a little easier to get a media publicity than if you're raising $1 million. But I would say that you can get past that by telling a compelling story that, we raised $1 million for this new product that is unique to the market, and we're launching it in a different way that hasn't been seen before, or we raised money from a local VC, or we bootstrapped, or whatever the story may be that supports that headline dollar figure, is the most compelling part that you're going to get the attention of Ohio X or a journalist around the state.
And Steve, I'm going to go to you next, but
I had a piggyback on that question, if you don't mind, for Evan, because we're always on the other side, right? We're helping the clients usually pitch, and it's an odd situation for us here on Ohio Tech Times News because we're helping on this side. Evan, do you feel like when people are doing that outreach for you, is it do they craft a narrative for you? Is that a better pitch for you, or do you just want bullet points? What's the best way for you to receive that information?
That's a great question, and I would say there's no right or wrong way. A lot of times you'll see a press release that is put together that, like Chris said, sometimes they're very unimaginative. You could use ChatGPT and pull together that information, but I think it does depend on the particular journalist. But I'll speak from my perspective. I think a few bullet points in in an email or a DM on X, or a phone call, or reaching out, mentioning at a conference, bumping into somebody. So I don't think it has to be that standard press release that we've seen always in the past. Maybe it's a bit less important than it used to be, or I'm just biased because when you get so many press releases or so many pitches, just having the bullet points is really sufficient a lot of times, because the journalist is going to do their research anyway, right? So if you receive the basic information, they're still going to want to turn that into a conversation most of the time. Now, it's not, like I said, not always the case, because a press release can be valuable if it's a pretty standardized announcement about a company partnership or a fundraising. That press release could supplement whatever message you're sending. So I would recommend even doing both in some instances where you have the press release, you've done this press release, but then you can initiate contact with the journalist with just a quick note that says, hey, we've got this announcement to make. Here's one sentence, 2 sentences of detail, or a few bullet points. Would you like me to send the full press release? And then they can let you know either way. I know there's some press release services as well, like Business Wire and PR Newswire, that are popular. I would say more so with bigger corporations. And there's value there for if you're a publicly traded company and regulatory things you need to disclose, that a press release a formal press release does make sense. But for small tech startups, I would say it's not always the best first contact with a journalist.
Yeah, and Steve, that was a great follow-up, and Evan, to kind of add to that, and I love the tactical nature that we're starting to talk about for some of these things, because I've been on both sides, like you, Steve, and you as well, Evan, and now we're getting a lot of incoming, and one of my kind of tactical pieces of recommendation is, like, I love the idea of making it shorter, a few bullet points, and then you can always do, like, I've seen some really effective ones where they'll have the full press release, but at the top is like this short summary with 3 or 4 bullet points. And then that way we can kind of look really quickly to see, like, oh, does this make sense? Or if it does, even, like, who do we send it to? Because Evan, you might cover a certain story for us, or Steve, you all might cover another type of story. But the other one, and this is just my personal preference, but I cannot stand when people send press releases as just PDFs. It's like, hey, look at the attached, because then I have to go look at the attached. It's not really interactive, so I can't click. If I need to copy and paste over, like, a name to look for them on LinkedIn or whatever, it's just really, really tough. And so I love when people just either send it as like a permalink off of like a blog press release on their own website, or just put it all in the text in the body. Because the PDFs, it's like, what am I supposed to do with this? Am I going to print it up and put it on like the board on the wall and then like hand it over to someone and they're going to start writing it? Like, no, maybe 20 years ago. And so I love those kind of little like tactics and tips that are starting to come out. And so it's just fascinating, all the different ways that you can potentially do it. But Steve, I want to ask a question, kind of, as we're thinking about compelling content and starting from the, what is that hook? Evan mentioned like the 2 OSU graduates, more so than just like, hey, it's another pilot project between 2 companies that doesn't really have a bigger hook. But, working with the media is just one way. And so whether that's, the Youngstown Business Journal or Columbus Business First, that's a great way to get messaging and storytelling out. But creating own content, own blogs, whether white papers, everyone's trying to do a podcast these days. Certainly LinkedIn is really huge. That's an area that you all do a lot in content creation. How do you kind of think about the difference between working with traditional media there, but then having a strategy that maybe in some parts is similar, some parts is different, on your own distribution channels?
Yeah, we look at it as, own media versus earned media. And own media, we always preach, should be part of the funnel or the consumer journey, whoever you're trying to reach and whoever you're trying to nurture down. Your own media, you can have a little bit different of a slant, which is, in today's world where almost everybody's a journalist, not everybody's classically trained, like Evan is, to be impartial, right? But own media, you can put that slant to it. You can guide the user, you can guide the audience down to your next piece of content. You can guide them down the journey. You can guide them to where you want them to get. And that content, whether it's social publishing or just a blog or your website copy, needs to be guiding the user always with intention, right? It's not just when it's put on somewhere else. We look at the earned media or dealing with the media, or like Ohio Tech News is activating what we have already created or what we've already created a narrative around. So we look at outwardly for other media platforms to activate and to get extra reach that might not be in our current funnel or within our current ecosystem. So we always look at that as to activate and get more reach, get more engagement to expand upon our audience. When we're speaking with the own content that we own on our website or on our social profiles for clients, it's directing and nurturing them down the funnel. But when we activate that outwardly, it's getting new people within our system, getting them to be able to then get them in our system to where we can nurture it down. As simple as email marketing. I mean, your newsletter, that's part of your content. That's activation. That's moving people down the journey, down the funnel, down the journey, and what you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes that accomplishment is just getting reach and just getting followers. With a lot of people I bet that are on this call, it's not so much getting customers, it's not getting data, it's getting reach and getting awareness about what they're doing, so that way people they get the right eyes on them and following them. So that's always how we look at it. Our media is it should be impartial, I believe, and I think that's kind of how we approach the articles. With impartial meaning there's not like a political slant or anything like that, but it's more of a cheerleader, right? With what you're doing and with Ohio X, it's to prop up the community, it's to help other people out. And that's the one thing that I've been it was kind of eye-opening for me, is in following Christopher the last couple of years, and when you started this site, it's not necessarily about every single pitch and every single article individually in a silo or in the micro, but the macro is building up this database and this aggregate of all these articles to where now you're the hub for anybody and everybody that wants to follow along. So the article we post today, it might not be the hook, or it might not be the one catalyst for some company to get to the next level, but what they're doing is they're helping the whole community rise. So that way in next month or 6 months or next year, they're helping the next company behind them get that traction, get that reach, and get the right eyeballs. So that was one of the things that I just love about Ohio, the Midwest, and this community in particular, is in the real life, when we get together and you have those meetups or, your newsletter, it's always about celebrating everybody else's wins. That's what it's all about. And that's one of the great things that I found, kind of satisfying about the community and what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. And kind of some of your commentary and something, Evan, you were saying here earlier, but as you're creating content, knowing your audience, and you talking about, building the reach, building the followers, because that's something that, we see a lot. And again, we're starting to kind of see the other side with ohiotechnews.com, where people keep sending us stuff. And so you start to kind of see how really good companies are doing it, and maybe sometimes companies that aren't as good, by just the name alone, ohiotechnews.com. I always, kind of laugh when we'll get a pitch like, hey, here's a company out in Michigan. It's like, well, this isn't really exactly what we do. And Evan, you were mentioning some of the beats you were covering. So maybe could you talk a little bit about, whether it's creating your own content and you're pushing it on LinkedIn, or you're putting it, Steve, to your point, in newsletters and others. Our newsletter and our site works because it's Ohio. Like, we're not covering startup news in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just not what our readership wants. And so, Evan, maybe kind of talk a bit about knowing, the intended audience, because sometimes it seems like companies go way too wide and they're just hoping that, anyone's going to pay attention, or, we get a lot of, hey, can you share this podcast? It's like, this isn't our audience at all. Like, our folks won't want it, and it's not going to be helpful to you. So like, it just doesn't really kind of match up. So maybe talking about knowing the audience, and kind of designing content and marketing focus around that.
Absolutely. So read the room is the easy advice there. It's just go to the website and consume the content and see what kind of articles are being written, and what industries are being covered, what's the latest news in that industry, and what companies are getting some of the most attention. And so if you are, the more familiar you are with the publication you're pitching, or with, if it's Ohio X, what's being posted on ohiotechnews.com, the more likely you are going to craft a compelling story to be able to tell that fits in with that platform. And I'll say one thing I wanted to say is that it definitely helps to have really good news to share, and a big fundraising announcement or something that's going to capture a lot of attention. And so expanding and being successful as a company is, of course, helpful to getting media attention in the space. But I will say that one other strategy to think about is to serve as an expert commentator on a particular industry. And so if you know that AI is being written about all the time on ohiotechnews.com, you can, if that happens to be a niche, an area of expertise, then you can form a relationship with whatever journalist it is around the state, wherever you're located, or with Ohio Tech News to be an expert resource to weigh in on that topic. It doesn't even have to be a piece of news about your company. It can be commenting on the national news of the day. If there's some big news from OpenAI or any other company or AI regulations, it's really good to be positioned as a resource there. So I would encourage people to build a rapport or some sort of relationship, if possible, with the journalists that are in your market, with Ohio Tech News, or Ohio X, and to really be engaged consistently and not just pop up every 6 months or every year when you have an article that you think will benefit your company. So think about what's being discussed and written about out there on a daily and weekly basis.
Yeah, that's great, Evan. And one comment, and then I'm going to hop to a question that we got in the chat. But one comment there is actually just yesterday. I had a catch-up call with a business journalist, and it wasn't me pitching them anything. It was just them looking for, hey, maybe what are some pieces of news or interesting stories that they could tell. And so it's part of their job to cultivate this. But unless people are kind of sending them a bunch of great press releases, which I think sometimes maybe people feel like that, oh, they're never going to cover me because whatever reason. I don't think that's always true. I think it's just people aren't necessarily taking the time to package it, put it in a good kind of pitch, and send it over. And so we were just catching up, having a conversation about some of the trends we're both seeing. I didn't have any purpose other than just being helpful. So to your point, kind of being a recognized expert, in the traditional media sense, that is something that very much for small business owners, CEOs, startup founders, investors, kind of community folks, can be a really good opportunity, because then you build relationships. And Steve, earlier, you were mentioning something, and I thought of like, well, that's just top of mind. Companies and people want to be top of mind when you think about, hey, who is the best, PR pro in Columbus? It's Evan. Hey, who has the best content marketing company in the Mahoning Valley? It's Steve and I Synergy. And so, a lot of it is just being top of mind. And so to go to a question that we got, and so thanks, Samuel. And as a reminder, people can send it to us, DM me, but I want to start weaving some of these in. But, what are some good, and maybe Steve, this is a good one for you, and then Evan will go to you, but what are some good tools and or CRM tools that help identify key intended audiences with specific audiences versus having just a huge Rolodex, lists can be obtained, generated. So I'll turn it over to you, but Samuel, I'll offer one point. If you're looking for traditional media, the universe isn't typically that big. And so, there might be one or two or three Evans in each local community. And so some of it can be just as simple. I think we can overcomplicate needing these huge lists if we're looking for the traditional media route. So in Columbus, there's 3 TV stations, 1 traditional business publication, 1, Columbus Dispatch, and then a couple kind of like blogs that might cover this. So you could probably spend an hour and get the 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 people that you actually need to have a relationship with, or you want to send things to. And it can be as simple as that without having to invest in kind of software. But, as you go deeper with, more professional companies like Steve's and Evans, I'll turn it over to both of you on maybe some tips that Samuel and others can get on this.
First thing I would say is make sure you know your audience. I think I would have said it a couple times already. Just know who your audience is. A lot of times you are your own audience. You just have a different lens that you're looking through. And where do you get your own news? Where do you find your information? Where do you get your data from? And curate those relationships. But in understanding your audience, where do they get their information? Where do they get their media? Where do they spend their time? every single person is on a device, but they're on a certain app, or where do they get their information at, knowing where they get that from. And building that out, we actually document, and I think the best case scenario is to document, your audiences, your personas, or whatever you want to call them, whatever, depending on what platform you follow and methodology. They have different names for them, but that's what I would start, making sure you understand who you're trying to reach, why you're trying to reach them, and the value prop that you're going to give to them. And the one for digitally, what we use a lot of times for that is SparkToro. It's been a couple of years now. It's Rand Fishkin, the founder of Moz. It's his second, go around with entrepreneurship. I think it's been like 2 or 3 years now, but it's just an audience profiling is what it is. You can put it in by social media, what they follow, by their tag, whatever that is, and it'll tell you where they get their and digest their information. It'll tell you podcasts that they follow. It'll tell you periodicals that they follow. Do they spend more of their time on which social media platform do they spend it on, and what type of news websites that they get their information from. But that's a huge. We don't follow it to a T. It's not like it's not linear with A, B, C. You have to take all that information and do a little bit of critical thinking, get a little creative on how you approach them and where you find them at. But it's a really good roadmap of basically finding your destination.
Thanks, Steve. Evan?
I'll leave that question there. I think Steve covered it, so I don't want to waste anybody's time. Yeah.
Perfect. So, and then, I think next is giving some specific examples of, some stories that we have been creating, but again, with, how we came to be, how these resonated. And so this first one that I'll go, and then, Evan, I'll maybe turn one over to you, and then Steve, a story for you to share a bit about. But, as simple as this is, Ohio's best coffee shops, here are some of Tech's favorites. This was a way we engaged our audience. So our weekly newsletters, you can see here, over 7,500 smart people we read our weekly tech newsletter, and anyone can join this. It's a free service. But in there, we're always trying to cultivate a relationship. And so we're testing, what stories people like, what we're including or not including, and every week you can kind of see that. You look at some of the statistics. What are people clicking on? What are they not clicking on? What are they engaging with? One of the big things is email deliverability, where you don't want to go into spam. People get a million different, kind of emails going through their inboxes. And so what we've started to do more and more is put in like questions and prompts. So then it gets people replying. They feel like they're part of the email versus just, hey, here's another email with a million links and it's kind of boring and maybe I'll look at it and maybe not. When we started doing that, we saw our open rate really kind of start to make some nice improvements. And it was always in a good kind of spot. But this best coffee shops, this question, I have probably had this conversation with like 1,000 people as I've traveled the state. We'll be meeting at a local coffee shop and, hey, do you all have an office? No, we don't. We travel. Where do you do that? Coffee? It's like, what are your recommendations? Or a big one is people will say, hey, over in San Francisco, Sand Hill Road, if you go down there to the Starbucks or any coffee shops, you'll run into people building things, you'll run into venture capitalists. But as we think about, tech communities and where do people collaborate and meet one another, it's probably over a coffee shop. It might be over a co-working office, but that requires, a subscription or some type of membership probably. But coffee shops are in some ways kind of like a heart of the tech community across the state in our cities. So as simple as it was, we just took a question that we get asked a lot. We asked our readers, we got a bunch of good replies, and then we put together this blog, as simple as it was, where we could promote small businesses. So you're not going to see the Starbucks or the Dunkin' Donuts on here, but it was just a fun way to kind of take a question again that we're having, ask our readership, and then share a bunch and kind of take some of the best ones and some of the commentary and be able to kind of open source it. So there's a bunch on here that I've been to, but there's a bunch that I haven't. And so, next time I'm in Cleveland or Cincinnati or Chardon or Avon Lake or Akron, I might want to check out some of these. We then were able to see after we posted this, we shared it, we promoted it a bit. Turns out people really liked reading this because it's something that they can resonate with. Maybe it gives them an inspiration to go somewhere to have a coffee shop meeting. Maybe they just want to try somewhere new. Maybe they want to see where are other people going? And it gives them an opportunity. If you're in Columbus on Grandview Avenue, Evan, we've met there probably a dozen times, but Stoff's, that's kind of where a bunch of people will go. It's always packed and you're probably going to run into 2 or 3 people. But Steve, if you're from Northeastern Ohio, you might not know that. But next time you're in Columbus, it might be kind of a cool thing to check out. And so as simple as this was, It was rooted in the fact that it's a conversation topic that we're part of a lot of times. It directly resonates with our audience where people, are asking us this, and we're doing a lot of meetings with people at coffee shops. So we turned it into a piece of fun content. It is as easy as it may have seemed. We didn't have to do this, but it was one of the best performing articles that we've put together in the past couple months. So it's been pretty cool to see. And Steve, I see you're on mute, and so
Yeah.
feel free to pop in.
I was just going to say, it's almost like you know your audience.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So, Evan, I pulled up a couple that you've written, and so maybe if you want to, share a little bit about this. This was one from 2023, but it was kind of a recap article. This other one was around fintech, so kind of two spaces that we know our audience. In Ohio, there is a ton of healthcare innovation. There's a ton of banks and financial services companies. So maybe you want to kind of talk about these, and as you were putting them together, what stood out, what you were including, and why these types of things resonate.
Yeah, first and foremost, it's the statewide lens that we're looking through with those articles. So everybody's heard Chris say it a million times that we've had these pockets of tech hubs and innovation and tech media throughout Ohio, but Ohio X is really bringing that together. And so Ohio Tech News can do the same thing with a media landscape where nobody's writing the article about healthcare innovation at the state level. There might be a great article in Columbus Business First or Cincinnati Business Courier, Cleveland, where around the state. But to do this through the lens of Ohio is really helpful for the audience who get to, like with the coffee shops, you don't always know what's going on in down Interstate 71 around the state. So that's the first thing that I would say. And then secondly, those two industries are just highly relevant, right? And in one way or another, most people touch those industries. And if they're not directly involved, they're going to be able to benefit in some way from knowing what's going on there. Why is fintech blossoming in Ohio? Why is it so successful? Well, that's going to impact everybody in the tech community. And so I think it's just helpful to have those, have the knowledge of healthcare, fintech, whatever is the industry that we're focused on here. So I would say those are two reasons that those articles would resonate. And then it's a bit of crowdsourcing there where we get to engage a lot of people from those particular industries. So Chris, if you scroll down, you'd see the number of companies that are mentioned in there and the projects. And it's a really good, you can include links off to previous articles we've written or to those organizations' websites. And so this is a hub, like Steve's mentioned, where we've now created at Ohio Tech News, a place where you can go and find this repository of information that months or years down the road you can refer back to. And I think that's what's special about both of those articles, as well as that it's rounding up a great deal of information packed into one article where you can click off and go in a bunch of different directions to go to a company in an organization's website or to click back to a previous Ohio X story. So hopefully those are evergreen articles, so to speak, that live on beyond just 2023, because you can reference that today and get value from it.
Yeah. And Evan, one of the reasons we created this was because we didn't have the answers to this, and this didn't. So in some ways we were creating it for ourselves, to your point of all that's happening. We needed to know this information. And then it turns out, it's a service to our community, where healthcare, financial services, those are big employers. And so sure, if someone's working at Key Bank in Cleveland, they might care what's happening at Fifth Third Bank in Cincinnati, or if you're at Cincinnati Children's in Southwestern Ohio, you may care what's happening at Nationwide Children's in Columbus. And so this was stuff that we needed ourselves. It just didn't exist anywhere. And so instead of just keeping this on our list, we said, hey, like let's open source it and make it available to anyone. And then it gives, to your point, it's kind of publicly sourced, and you can go back, find it, and share it. And so, Steve, a couple that you and your team have worked on. This has been a fun one that I've really liked. But Lauren on your team, back in November, put this one together. So Toledo entrepreneurs create AI-powered real-time support for mental health issues. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about this one?
Yeah, I'll try to talk about both of them a little bit together. But this is what I love what you're doing, Chris, with OhioTechNews.com. What Evan just described in those last two pieces is completely different than these two pieces when we're talking about mental health and a startup, right? And it's AI powered and backed. What they're bringing, and it's fun because every time we talk through email, I never know. You talk about tech, right? But tech can cross cut so many different industries, verticals, platforms, audiences. It's exciting to see. I'm like, man, this is amazing. What we're doing here in the state is that now we're talking about mental health. Like it's a subset, right, of the healthcare industry, but it's so specific. And what they're doing is talking about, and it's the different phases of innovation, right, and tech. Meaning this is a startup. They're out of the gates, and they're doing great things, great things. And what this does is it's touching on an issue that's been highly covered, obviously since COVID, even more has a spotlight on it, which is mental health. And talking about the people who deal with it the most, who need the most help. Yeah, and that 60% of college, I think it was college and high school, right? Qualify as a diagnosable mental health illness, which is crazy to think. Number one, that we're there, that's where we're at in the society, but also that this, inner peak is trying to solve and offer a solution to that. So that's amazing, and that's just one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum with TRC is a company that's over 50 years old and showing the history of innovation right here in the state of Ohio. So we go from a startup with AI now over to somebody in the in a mental health niche to TRC, which is in vehicle safety with over 50 years of history, and they're still innovating. To me, it's just amazing. It's motivating, and it just, if people that are following can't get excited about that and want to help the community and want to help our area, it just blows my mind because um, it also made me a little sad when I was going over this article that us as a state of Ohio, that Chris, and thankfully you guys are you doing it now, but how long have companies like TRC not been getting the coverage or had a community that they could leverage for the last 40, 45 years? Now they actually have somebody that we can help bring the spotlight to them. We can help prop them up. It can be a group effort for the state and the tech industry to help each other come up. So one end of the spectrum, 50 years old, still innovating, still bringing new products, evolving. They're with EVs and AVs to a startup based on AI. It's just amazing to think in the width that we're covering. Because Evan, in your two pieces, I feel like you went deeper, right? And it was very niche. You went deeper with those databases and those links and being able to have that historical data. These two are more width of proving that the subsectors and the different audiences that tech can touch.
Yeah. And Steve, what I love about this Toledo one, it's a small business startup that we had never heard of. That they somehow came across OhioTechNews.com, sent us a press release because what had happened was they were accepted into TechStars New York City Economic Mobility Accelerator, and so they did a really good job of showing how unique this is. Acceptance rate of less than 1%. So that alone shows that they're doing something right and that they have something novel and innovative. And then as they're talking with Lauren and your team, they are showing the need, showing the demand, taking something that is happening because there's all these apps out there, but they are able to kind of highlight that about 60%, as you mentioned, of students, meet this criteria for having a mental illness. What do you do when your therapist isn't available, or if you can't afford it, or your anxiety doesn't conveniently peak at 10 a.m. on Tuesday when your therapy session is scheduled? So it takes something that is a need, across the U.S. globally, but it's honing in on telling it as a Toledo, Ohio-based story. And so I love this one in particular, also because on our team, Keith Enstone, who's in the Toledo area, he's Mr. Toledo Tech, and he seems to know everyone up there, and he does incredible work. But he had never heard of this company. And so we got the pitch from this company. They didn't know us really. They didn't know Keith. We gave it to you and your team, Steve. And when we published this, Keith discovered a company that's in his backyard a few blocks away, and he reached out and made a connection. And so that's why we're, creating these pieces with a geographic lens, of connecting Toledo, connecting the state of Ohio. But as simple as it is, it just always shows that there's more and more of this to be told for sure. So, as we're starting to wrap up here, wanted to kind of highlight a few of these ohiotechnews.com pieces, kind of open it up to some kind of conversation, or I should say some Q&A. So I've been getting a few, and then also in a moment, both Evan and Steve, I'll ask you to share any final comments. One question that we did get, and I got via DM, is around content that you're creating, maybe on social media. There's a ton that's out there. People are, doing posts every single day, writing all this stuff, doing all these hashtags, and then, and this is some of my editorialization, but one or two people like it. And then you see someone else's and there's like 500 likes and you're like, how did that happen? So, maybe as we're thinking about content that, isn't with media, Steve, to your phrase of owned media, stuff that you own, your own distribution lists, maybe what's a tactic or one actionable tip for takeaway that we can give our viewers today around creating content that maybe they can start using on LinkedIn later this week?
Yeah, understand the platform and where you're activating your content at. You're not going to speak and frame and position a piece of content the same way you do on LinkedIn, as you do on Instagram, as you do on Facebook. Understand the platform, understand the audience that you're talking to in that platform and on that platform. Like just something as simple as tone, right? LinkedIn, people kind of expect a more professional tone, which is kind of going away a little bit, but also be true to your brand as well, right? Because if you're a very laid back and tech brand, you might have a more less professional, but just a more in your face type of brand. But that's my one key thing is understand the platform and the audience that's on that platform. Pretend you're sitting in a room with them physically, and how would you speak to those people? And then just let that come across in the platform.
I love that. Evan, how about you?
I would encourage using these platforms as a way to tell your story, even if you don't get earned media attention from traditional media outlets. And so it can be complementary. You can prove that you are worth following, because a lot of journalists will source stories from social media and they'll follow along with these companies. So if they see on LinkedIn that you are getting a lot of attention for some initiative or a project that you're involved in, that makes it more likely that they need to pay attention to you, and it can support that earned media strategy as well. So I wouldn't see those as siloed. I think those should support each other, your social media strategy and your earned media strategy, and you can be doing both at the same time, and they feed off each other. So it's definitely worth investing in, and I would say that it will support your overall marketing strategy, including with media, traditional media.
Yeah, and mine would be around, create for your audience. I think we see that where, some of this stuff on LinkedIn is kind of turned into like a Dear Diary for some people where like, they're just kind of treating it like, they're typing up whatever the first 200 words they feel every morning. It's like, what's the purpose of this? Like, are you really kind of cultivating your community, cultivating your audience? So, create for the community you do want to cultivate. And so, not every story that we're creating on ohiotechnews.com is going to resonate. And so, Evan, you're creating a story about fintechs. Well, if you're in manufacturing, you might not care about that. And that's completely fine, because we're trying to, touch on the things that do matter to our state. So financial services is a big one. Is the next TikTok going to be built or born here? So we're not kind of doing, stuff around TikTok influencers, because that's probably not what our audience wants. So creating for the audience that you have, which kind of leads me to the second part of it, is that niches are really good, especially in the content creation side, is that if you're trying to, create content that everyone's going to resonate with, you give me 10 likes from 10 people that matter. If you think about it as you want 10 customers to like this, who cares if you have 10 likes versus 1,000 likes? It's like the 10 right people that you want to get this in front of. And so, create for your audience, and also don't be afraid to kind of go niche, because, if you're creating for everyone, but you don't sell to hospital systems, what is that really kind of helping advance with you and your company and ideals? So that was just kind of mine. Thanks for the question. And then as we're wrapping up, maybe we'll go Evan and then Steve to wrap us up. Any final thoughts, any final comments that you would like to share with the audience today?
I said it earlier, and I'll repeat it: be consistent with the engagement and the outreach. So if you're from a earned media perspective specifically, if you're just reaching out once or twice a year, it's unlikely that you're going to be taken. You're going to be recognized. And so if you're continuously posting to social media and engaging with the community and with journalists and OhioX, you're going to be part of the conversation, and you'll get to a certain point where they'll come to you for expert perspective. And so I would just recommend sticking with it and continually telling your story and being part of the bigger conversation.
Yeah, awesome. And Steve?
Yep, I would say that the activation needs to be part of a larger strategy. So trying to have a strategy planned out, the spray and pray approach, while sometimes it works, but very rarely. So just have a larger strategy with your content, your own content, how you're going to activate or come up with your content, and then how you're going to activate that. And I think, Chris, maybe part of that is even sharing that with Chris when they send over their pitches to you, of like, hey, this is everything that we're doing. How can we help? How can ohiotechnews.com or how can OhioX help us activate or achieve what we're trying to achieve with our strategy? And I think that's a great place to start. And one thing we didn't touch upon, I don't know if you've done it yet, Chris, but I would bet that you'd be very open to the idea of hooking somebody up with like a logo or something for their website saying featured in, or featured on ohiotechnews.com, right? Because it helps the brand, it helps the community, but also it adds a lot of social proof and authority to these startups and the tech companies on their site.
Yep. Yeah, great point. You see it on a lot of companies, especially earlier stage companies, featured in Forbes, featured in Columbus Business First. And so, yeah, as we're getting to tell more and more of these stories, and hopefully as we're piecing them together, we can, that can be that social proof that, people are getting coverage, getting noticed. But Evan, Steve, thanks so much for joining us today. To all of our viewers and attendees, thank you. Thanks for joining us. This is a fun topic for me. It's at the heart of what we get to do each and every day. And so we've been thrilled this year to really build out and release and start running with ohiotechnews.com, where we're telling more and more stories directly. We're doing it across cities, across the whole state of Ohio, and hopefully we get to continue doing that throughout the rest of this year and certainly into the next. But just want to appreciate and say thanks to everyone for joining us today. Hope you all have a great day, and feel free to reach out and share any stories you might have with us. But Evan and Steve, thanks again for joining us, and talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.